I received a letter from an old college friend of mine named Roderick. In the letter, he tried to explain that he had had a mental and physical breakdown and that he must see me as his only personal friend. I remember Roderick. Yes. He was tall, good looking, brilliant, reserved, and just a little bit eccentric. Roderick's letter touched me deeply, and I decided to go visit him. Maybe I could help him. It was a long journey on horseback over open fields and country. When I arrived, the first thing I saw was the house. I didn't realize Rodney's house was so large and so old. And the house itself was falling apart. It looked like the roof was going to cave in. And there was a black fungus surrounding the house, as if it were pulling the house into the ground. Everything around the house was black. The trees were all gnarled and black. The water in the lake around the house was black. And the clouds hung low and were black. When I arrived at the gate that bore the Usher's family name, I stopped. I could feel that the house was evil. Window-like eyes were looking down at me. It was the first time I felt fear creep up my left arm. So I decided to think positive, and I continued through the courtyard into the family room of the house. And I was impressed with the family room. There was a large table. But more impressive than that were the portraits of the Usher family on the walls. Roderick really had a history, spanning many generations of father to son, and father down to son. I noticed something that all of the portraits had in common. It were that the eyes were dark and very round. I went up to meet Roderick, and I was shocked. Roderick's face was thin and pale, but more shocking than that was that his dark hair was completely white. Roderick, what happened to you? Roderick was so happy to see me, and he gave me a big hug. And then he started to complain about that he had been ill, and he was withdrawn, and he wasn't eating, and he wasn't sleeping. His clothing was thin, and the candles in the room were all dim. But most of all, he could hear voices in the house. All of a sudden, something ran behind me. And it ran and ducked beneath a wooden table. And he poked up its head, and it was a girl. It was a young girl that bore a strong resemblance to Roderick. Who's that? That is my sister Madeline. She's the last of the Usher family. Madeline poked her head up and down and ducked around and ran around the room, and I laughed. She just wanted to play. That night, I was very tired, and I went to bed. I woke up feeling refreshed. I got dressed to meet Roderick for breakfast. And Roderick told me that his sister Madeline died last night. What? I just saw her yesterday and she was fine. I know, but she has an incurable illness. She died. I saw her body laid out. She had a long white dress. I couldn't believe it. She was young. She was beautiful, with long black hair, rosy fresh cheeks, and pink lips. I saw her there, and I saw Roderick grieving for her. I thought, something's not right. So in the next few days, Roderick told me that it was time to bury Madeline. So, okay, where are we going to bury her? Outside? No. We'll bury her in the house. In the house? Yes. Where? In the basement. In the basement of the house? Yes. This was so strange to me. I helped Roderick take Madeline's body and place it in a coffin. And I nailed the lid of the coffin shut. And we carried the body through a long hallway to a secret door. When I opened the door, I saw a long spiral staircase going into the darkness. Roderick gave me a candle, and I lifted up the coffin, and we began walking down the long spiral staircase, down, and spider webs were on the walls. We went down, and spiders were crawling all over. And rats were darting past my ankles. And the wall became narrower and narrower and narrower. Roderick said, "Keep going, we're almost there." We climbed further down, down and down to hell. We opened a large steel door, and with my candle, I entered the room. And I almost fainted. I saw Usher family members, over 100 of them, buried in the walls, stacked on one on the other, all throughout. There were bodies full on the floor, stacks of bodies, and propped up against the wall, more bodies. Roderick, explain this. Roderick told me that his family spanned some 200 years. And they lived in a beautiful place. And they had a great life until a plague from the ground took control of the house. And all of the family members became ill, and they died in the house. Where are we going to bury Madeline? Just leave her here. Leave her here? Just like that? For a week, I tried to cheer Roderick up. We painted, we talked story, we read books, we played music, but he was still grieving for Madeline. I finally told him, I'm going to leave tomorrow morning. Oh no! He got on his knees and begged me, stay here with me. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with you in this house? Roderick stood up. He looked at me, and he knew I didn't understand. That night, I struggled to sleep. But outside, torrential rains and wind, lightning and thunder kept me awake. All of a sudden, Roderick burst into my room. His face was white, and he was frightened. He said, come. What's up? What? Come. He took me into his room, and he slammed the door and locked it. Roderick, what's wrong? Can you hear that? Can you hear voices in the house? I couldn't hear anything. I could only hear the storm and the wind outside. He took me close up to his collar and pulled me right up to his face and said, there's something I must tell you. I buried Madeline alive. Alive! What? Why? To save her spirit from this house. I gave her medicine to put her to sleep, to fake her death. Maybe we can save her. No. I could hear Madeline coming for me. She's coming for me. She's on the other side of the door. Look at the floor. The floor was moving. Do you see that? I couldn't see anything. Look at the walls. They're breathing. Can you see that? I couldn't. Look at the ceiling. Can you see that? Do you feel that? Roderick must have thought I thought Roderick insane. But I heard pounding on the door, and then it became real. I could hear Madeline screaming, Roderick! Madeline's here. So Roderick ran to get a chair and a book and sat the chair directly in front of the door and gave me the book. He said, I want you to read this. Read this. Read it to me now. And I looked at the story, and it was a story about a brave knight who was fighting the evil and the darkness, but he feared nothing. Madeline was pounding on the door, and it fell open. And I saw Madeline standing there with black circles under her eyes and blood from her fingertips because she was scratched at the lid of her coffin to get out. And Madeline pointed a finger at Roderick. And Roderick was, "Read me the book, read!" And Madeline ran and jumped on Roderick and knocked him over. And at the same time, knocked a candle to the floor. And the room burst into flames. The flames leapt high. I tried to save Roderick, but Madeline was too strong. She was choking her brother. And Roderick was screaming and flailing about, and the fire was getting bigger. So I ran out of the room, downstairs into the family room, and then I stopped. I stopped right there because I could hear voices inside the house. I looked, and all of the Usher's portraits' eyes were staring at me. They were all staring at me, and I feared for my life, and the fear went into my arm. No! I burst out of the house, and I ran as fast as I could and as far as I could, and I stopped, and I was breathing heavily, and I looked around, and I'll never forget what I saw. I saw the house of Usher consumed in flames, burning and burning to the sky, and the eye-like windows that were staring at me were being consumed by the fire. And the fear in my arm was almost intolerable. And I saw the black fungus from the ground reach up. And it too was on fire. And I could hear the family inside laughing and screaming. And the fire was consuming the house. The fungi hands were pulling the house into the ground. And the fear was too much. I stood there cowering as the fire and the fungus destroyed the house. And I saw the fungus pull the house completely into the ground. And the entire countryside was black, except for the gate that bore the Usher's family name. Now I understand Roderick. He tried to tell me that the house was evil from the ground that surrounded it, where once the proud Usher family stood. We could have saved Madeline. She was the last of the Usher line. But Roderick said no. The curse would prevail. So it looked like to me that that was the destiny, that the house itself would be destroyed, the family name ruined, and Roderick would be sent to hell. Now, even today, I'm afraid, because I had developed this fear in my arm. Do you see this, fear? You must be very afraid. Be very, very afraid. Be very, very afraid.